We have a lot to talk about today, so let's welcome our guests. Jill Harrison-Berg is a leadership coach and a school improvement consultant, a researcher and an HGSE alum. Jill is the author of Leading in Sync, Teacher Leaders and Principals Working Together for Student Learning. Patrick Harris II is a middle school English teacher and dean of students at the Roper School in Detroit, Michigan. Patrick is the author of The First Five, a love letter to teachers. And Susan Moore Johnson is a professor of education here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Susan is the author of Where Teachers Thrive, Organizing Schools for Success. Welcome, Jill, Patrick, and Susan.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Hi, everyone.
All right. So we're thinking about, what teachers need to be effective and valued in their schools. So Jill, what do you think teachers need to feel supported and to have a strong sense of community?
Well, teachers really want to be successful in their work. We know that the pay is low, no one's in it to get rich. They're there to be the best they can for their students. What they need to be able to be the best for their students are each other. They need the time, both structural and cultural supports that allow them to collaborate with colleagues. They also need real growth-oriented support. They need the support and accountability to grow and be the best teachers they can be for their colleagues. And they also need to have a voice in the conditions that are necessary for them to get their work done. So they need to have a voice in school level decision making.
And so those are great things that they need. And so then because we see a decline in the prestige of teaching profession and the teacher morale, what do educational leaders, the school leaders, need to do to help teachers feel that sense of community?
Absolutely. So, I mentioned the notion that there are cultural as well as structural supports that are needed in order to be able to collaborate. So teachers, may want to work with their colleagues, but where's the time for them to do so? Teachers they'll not only need, that protected time within the school day to be able to do that, but some training is needed as well. Teachers need leadership skills. They need to know how to recognize and advocate for the things that they need. They need to know how to facilitate effective conversations among their colleagues. They need to understand what makes change hard and how to advance the kinds of change that actually leads to improvement for each and every student, not just reproducing the status quo. And so these are supports that school leadership ideally would provide. School and district administrators can help build into teachers' workday the time for that kind of capacity building. I mentioned the cultural part as well. Of course, the foundation of trust. None of this happens without trust. And school administrators can make or break whether or not a trusting climate and psychological safety are present in a school.
And so when you talk about trust, Jill, are you talking about teacher to teacher, teachers to administrators? Where do you think?
As well as teachers to student, teachers to family. I think it all.
Okay, great. Thank you. So Patrick, you have a love letter to teachers. I love that part of the title of your book.
Thank you.
But new teachers can feel disillusioned about their ability to bring about the changes that Jill was talking about and that they think are necessary. I know you've had some experience with that. What's your advice to teachers, especially those first 5 years?
Oh, man. Well, first of all, I really think that it's important that teachers see themselves as whole human beings, right? Like, I like to tell people that the best teachers are the ones who live life to the fullest and are the ones who have the ability to come into the classroom, into any educational space in a healthy way. So taking care of yourself. For me, it was seeking therapy. For others, it may be eating, sleeping, yoga. I got my Beyonce concert tickets, right? Like all of those are like super important for really helping me to make sure that I have the capacity to show up in a work that is super perfectionistic and requires me to be the best version of myself, right? And so if I don't see myself as human, then I'm not going to be able to do this human work, right? If I don't see myself as a whole person, I'm not going to be able to be a shepherd in a child's life. And so really seeing myself as that, as a whole human being has been really helpful. I think it's also really important that teachers get really clear about their why, which I know we say it, we talk about the why all the time, but can I just be clear in saying that we can't talk about the why just to get us to work more. That's the only time I think we've talked about it in education, right? Tell me your why, because when that kid's acting up in October, you got to remember the why so that you can come do a little bit more. Tell me your why so that when you got to take papers home to grade, it'll motivate you a little bit more. But the why truly is a reminder of your story. The why is a reminder of how and why you show up to this very human work. And so if we can keep that in the center of our mind, I think that that'll also help us to get clear about why we're here and influence the ways in which we create these very these awesome lesson plans and educational experiences for children. Until we really make some mindset shifts about teachers and about who we are and what we do, it'll be really hard to support us. People got to know that new teachers walk in with strengths. I mean, I'm telling you, when I was a new teacher, my first 5 years, folks constantly told me, oh, you don't know it yet. You know what I mean? We got to keep putting stuff in your toolbox. But I'm telling you right now, my toolbox was overflowing with things. I didn't have an opportunity to reflect on what I was learning, nor did I have the opportunity to really understand the strengths that I was walking into the building with, right? And so that mindset shift to see teachers from a strength-based perspective is really crucial.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because we're always talking about seeing our learners from a strength-based perspective.
Right.
That's the old saying, if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander.
Yeah.
So with all of these strengths that you've talked about and being our whole selves, I mean, I know for a lot of teachers, there's a little bit of, push and pull in terms of guilt of, what should I change? Do I know enough to change? Make a change, and how do I make the change? And Jill had talked about, the school culture around trust. So where do you see the new teachers in the first 5 years thinking about building those trusting relationships so that they can affect some changes that they think that they have, again, as you say, the strengths to accomplish?
Well, before we talk about building trust, new teachers have to do the internal work to figure out what their values are, right? What is it that you truly care about? What do you believe about children? What do you believe about schools? And then you got to do the work of finding a school that actually matches your values. Too often, I was in institutions that did not match the ways in which I believe children should be treated, nor should they be, or how they should be educated. And thus, I found myself in like some very dangerous dissonance that I did not find sustainable for my practice. And so we got to be very clear that we're in the right school. And if you're not, I think there are a couple that are hiring, right? And so once you're there, I think that, yes, finding your people is really crucial and important. I know that, there are tons of other professions that say, oh, you don't have to like your coworkers, or you don't have to do that. I think teaching is one of those professions where actually you do have to like your coworkers, right? Yes, you absolutely do have to have that relationship. I mean, I got teacher besties from here to DC, and like those are folks who really know the true me. I'm telling you, seeing teaching as a full 360-degree human work requires you to show up as your full authentic self, while also doing the same thing for others, accepting people for who they actually are, being able to be there for folks. Teaching is going to require you to be vulnerable, right? And so the way that we show up and support our colleagues helps to build that trust. And as it comes to administrators, I think that's where it gets a little bit tricky. So it's been tricky for me. And I think that with that, I think it definitely takes humanizing both sides to be able to make that work. But I also just want to push school leaders to flatten the hierarchy a little bit, especially because there's so much on a principal's plate, so much that principals are responsible for. I think that when we can flatten that hierarchy and be able to see each other as like mutual colleagues, we'll be able to have that trust to move forward.
All right. So Patrick, you talked about that sense of hierarchy. Jill, I want to go back to you because you've been working with school leaders around this culture. And so what kind of advice, what have you seen school leaders to address this concern that Patrick just mentioned around kind of flattening the hierarchy, or what we would say, and maybe, distributive leadership? What do you think are some of the levers for school leaders to make that work?
Absolutely. That is so much easier said than done. So many principals say they believe they're about distributed leadership. They believe in teacher leadership, but they often have, their own unique movie in their head about what that is. Some people think leadership is like their deck of cards that they could just distribute. Some people are excited about teacher leadership because it means they can get teachers to do the things that they don't want to do. Maybe they have too much work to do and I want to just distribute it. That's not actually what we're hoping for when we're thinking about teacher leadership. We're recognizing that our schools have systems that are the way they are because one individual, oftentimes a white man, is making the decisions for all of the systems that are supposed to be supporting teaching and learning throughout all of the classrooms and for each and every student. And there's no way that one perspective, no matter what that one perspective is, can meet the needs of each and every student. If we're really serious about equity in schools and we're serious about recognizing that our systems are inequitable by design, we need to be thinking about how we're bringing the voices of and experiences of everyone throughout the school, many people throughout the school, to bear on school-wide decision making. So that's the mindset shift. That's the biggest mindset shift that educational leaders really need to make as they think about what really distribution of leadership means. I always talk about that fact that leadership is already distributed in schools. There's a lot of stealth leadership happening. Leadership can be positive and negative. We all know about, the teacher announces an exciting new unit that we're going to be working on for the next few weeks. And one student who crosses their arms and rolls their eyes has just influenced everyone in the class about whether that unit is going to be successful, sort of shaped people's perceptions of whether they want to lean into this upcoming unit in class. Now, that's the same dynamic that can happen for a school leader at a staff meeting or a district leader throughout the district. And so leadership is just influence. So what are we doing to fine tune our ability to recognize the places and ways in which individuals are already leading? And what can we do to recognize our shared values? Patrick talked about that importance of shared values. How can we use our values to help us, lead in the same direction, align so that we're not inadvertently working against each other? So it's really different work. It sometimes, as I say, principals sometimes think it's going to lighten their load to engage with teacher leaders. I'm going to say it's going to shift your load. The work's going to be different work. It's going to be different work because you're going to have to be thinking a lot more about communication, shared leadership, shared vision, and you have to be thinking about how you can organize, how you can really recognize what is fixed and what's flexible, what you're asking teachers to do and what you're telling teachers to do. There are times when things need to be a little bit more directive, but don't pretend that teachers have a voice in something when they actually don't, when you actually just have already an idea and now you're playing guess what I'm thinking. So that's a skill. It's principals I've worked with who are very committed to this, sometimes take a while to understand how to lead in sync, how to really share leadership in a way that is going to leverage those unique perspectives and diverse thoughts that are essential to avoiding that one leader's blind spots, which we know that we all have.
Great. That brings some humility to the role of the school leader. Suzanne, what can you tell us from your research and your personal experience as a teacher and an administrator about that sense of community, this sense of shared leadership, this sense of shared values that teachers need so they can thrive and be successful?
Yeah, I think one of the real challenges here is that this is such a big issue. And what we have learned is that every school is different, even within the same community, the same district, and the priorities that principals and teachers as leaders and teachers as, as teachers are going to be shaped by the demands that are on that school. And right now, schools are still suffering tremendously from the effects of the pandemic. And so there are sometimes more problems to be addressed than people can kind of get hold of. And they feel overwhelmed and want to know where to start, how to fix the most important things. What I've found is that the principals whose schools are most successful, and by that, I mean comparing communities of similar income and diversity. So it's not clearly wealthy schools and low-income schools are different because of the resources that they often get. But there are differences among, say, low-income schools that are really notable. And one is that the principal not only is learning to listen, not only learning to know the new teachers, as Patrick's suggesting, not only figuring out how to make Jill happy in her classroom, but they realize that they cannot do it themselves, that the school, no matter what that kind of organization chart looks like, they cannot do everything that they want to have happen. And the principals of effective schools essentially realize, realize that they need their teachers as partners. They don't participate in this sort of symbolic and empty buy-in to their own plans. They're trying to understand what's the most pressing problem that our school has, and how do we begin to address it? Because, I mean, for example, if teachers are working in isolation, and nobody knows what anyone else is doing, and you want to set up teams, there are many steps involved in that process. But as a principal, you have to know, what is it teachers think they need to do? What can they contribute? How can they work best together? So it ranges from the principal making sure that the schedule works for all the teachers to have time to meet with colleagues and to coordinate their work. So they might have a certain time to talk about curriculum and instruction, another day to look at how to support student needs, how to think about parental engagement in the school. And once people have that attitude, sort of as a norm, professional norm across the school, then people can start to say, okay, we have 4 empty positions at really important levels of the elementary school, say. How do we go about finding teachers? The big mistake I fear that people are making right now is not realizing that they have to do more than cover the classroom, that just, hiring people to say we're fully staffed is such a mistake. And so the successful schools that I've seen are so deliberate about hiring. First, they're always recruiting, always, anywhere they go. They're talking about their school. They're trying to find out what people might be interested in doing. And really, their question is always, would you be a good match for our school? Would we figure out together that this is a great place for you to be? So if I were hiring teachers right now, I would, as a principal, want to make sure that the prospective teachers, future colleagues, got to meet with other teachers, and that I would be influenced by their views about whether this is an appropriate person. It's amazing how many teachers are hired without anyone seeing them teach. And so making sure that you really have someone do a demo lesson. You know, teachers would say to me, we want to know whether that person can teach our kids. And that really meant respect our kids, understand their world, join with colleagues to figure out what to do for them. So there are these systems within the school that can be developed to actually make this, you know, joint leadership, partnership really work. And it's important to choose one and start from there. And once one thing goes well, then you can build on that to the next.
Well, thank you. So Patrick, you had some facial responses to, you know, that match. So have you been involved in helping to recruit or interview potential colleagues? And is that a way of building that community that you were talking about?
Yeah, I think one thing that my school gets right is the ways in which we recruit and facilitate a hiring process for teachers. First of all, our hiring team is always sort of a mixed bag of stakeholders. And so there's teachers, there are students on the interview panel, there are administrators on the panel. And so like there's everyone who, like, you know, our school is quite small, but everyone who would interact, you know, or be impacted by this hire will be on the hiring committee. And so I think that is important. And even, you know, last summer, or, you know, even in the midst of August, right, like still doing what Susan says, which is like bringing folks in for a demo lesson, just to and giving them an opportunity to create a lesson that showcases their strengths and their passions, so that, so we can see if this is a mutually beneficial match, and then being able to have conversations with them throughout the process. So really seeing it as a process and really professionalizing teaching throughout the hiring process.
One of the things that was most interesting, I'll be quick, Jill.
Oh, no, I am going to get to
One
Jill.
of the things that was most interesting was that the principals would watch the lesson and then debrief it with the candidate. And they weren't as concerned with the lesson as the teachers were. They were concerned about whether this person has a growth mindset, whether they're really determined to get better. So there are lots of parts to that one process. Sorry, Jill.
Yeah, not at all. Absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how have you worked with school leaders, or how have school leaders talked about the hiring process to build this sense of community where we know, as Patrick was saying, you know, this is a profession where you really do need to like the people you're working with.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And respect them.
Yeah. And, you know, there are certain knowledge and skills and dispositions that are sort of teachable, and there's others that you're going to have to hire for. Teaching is just too hard to be excellent at all the components of it.
Right.
And we don't know how to educate each and every student perfectly well yet. We haven't cracked that nut. So we need to create schools as learning organizations. And that means we need lots and lots of different kinds of expertise coming together. So when you mention hiring, we want to make sure we're hiring people who have that growth mindset, because we're going to have to be learning together and learning on the job. That's got to be a non-negotiable. We need a hiring way to suss that out, figure out, you know, who is coming ready to lean into that. But further, I wanted to mention the notion that, you know, where the case came up where, you know, say there's 4 vacancies in the school. I'm not sure that schools, because of the fact that teaching is so hard, we need to keep track of the expertise that the teachers that we have, the educators that we have, do have. Everyone has strengths, everyone has areas they need to grow. But if I've got 4 vacancies and I don't currently have anyone on the staff who has really strong ELL expertise, who really knows how to, you know, differentiate instruction, somebody who maybe really could help lead the staff in more effectively engaging in sort of justice circles, or it might be something simply like using social media skills, or using technology to support the efficiency of our inter-staff communication. We need to keep track of who knows what within our school, what the gaps are. And when we're hiring, we're going to hire strategically and make sure we know X, Y, Z about our students. Do we have the expertise on our staff that we need to serve those students well? And if not, we want to keep that in the foreground as we're hiring.
Well, thank you all. Thank you all for your thoughts on these questions. And we have some questions from our audience. So I'm going to read one, and whoever wants to respond, please jump in. Can you give specific examples of healthy shared leadership that have worked successfully in the past?
I would certainly say so.
That's a big open-ended question.
Yeah,
So
I know.
we need to get specific for sure. I think, so here's one. I think that teams of teachers led by facilitators who are teacher leaders, that is a really important piece of this. But I have seen schools that dedicate administrative time to supervising those facilitators, and in the best way, not overseeing them, but actually helping them think about an agenda and the follow-up and work with people. It's those kind of particular things that are not so much personal in their pieces, you know. It really is about being clear about what people need to do to support the whole thing.
Okay. Jill, do you want to add anything? Patrick?
Yeah, I think that the notion, I don't know if it's a shared leadership model, but the notion of having instructional leadership teams in schools, and having a venue where folks of different roles and from different parts of the school are coming together. Ideally, you have someone representing every instructional team such that messages can go back and forth between the whole school instructional leadership team and every teacher in that school. Is essential, especially for the notion that we are trying to redo our schools. We're trying to figure out, take what every team and grade level team or department in the school is learning about their students and about what's not working for their students, and bring it to a school level venue to have some shared leadership of that. Let's own together the what's not currently working for students, especially the students who are really most underserved, and make decisions together with everyone's intel put together about how to shift that. So,
you know, one thing we didn't talk about at all, and we should, is induction. So Patrick was, you know, focusing on new teachers coming in. So once we've hired these people, especially if they're new to teaching, we have to have a plan for them. And there was great hope in one-to-one mentorship for a long time, but it was very, very hard to implement. Well, time wasn't allocated. And if Patrick was my mentor, I might not even be on the same floor or, you know, see him. So having teams that people are moving into is a really effective way of suddenly being immersed in what other people are doing teaching. So it's not like I'm the new person and everyone needs to tutor me, but actually I can see how my work complements or works with other people's efforts.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Patrick, you talked about, you know, being part of the interview process. Are teachers in part of an induction process?
Yeah, so we have a new teacher orientation, specifically which I know many districts have. And we really spend that time building community and like sharing the value, and which I think also of the history of the school and like why we exist, and just like, you know, building kind of that shared philosophy and being able to hear from them as well. I also just wanted to add this point that I think might be interesting when we're talking about shared leadership is I think especially in the midst of a hiring crisis, but I think generally I think that a lot of people leave the classroom to do other roles, but the most important job, I think, is to be in the classroom with kids. And so I think, how can we ensure that as people take on these leadership roles, that they are still in front of children where we need them? So like, you know, for me currently, I teach 6th grade English. and I teach a middle school English elective. I have a 50% or 60% teaching schedule, but I'm also the dean of students, right? I'm also an administrator. And this role has given me a chance to look at middle schoolers from a different perspective. It also has put me on leadership teams with our campus director and our school counselor. And so I'm in those rooms, but I'm also still a teacher, right? And so I'm also still building those relationships, which it's a lot easier to do as a teacher than it is as an administrator or as a support staff person, etc. And so because we have the most face time with kids. And so when we're talking about shared leadership, I also think just like opening up more, I guess you could say, teacher leader roles where the teaching part is still a core portion of that person's day.
Wow, I thank you all for your expertise. Thanks everyone for joining us. I don't know where our 30 minutes went. Thank you for joining us today and to watch for further. We hope that you will go on to the Education Now and watch other presentations. So again, thank you all for being here. Thanks Jill Harrison-Berg, Patrick Harris II, and Susan Moore Johnson. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.